I'm Tricia Homer, and I'm here with the Neighborhood Design Center team, and we're going to be talking about their values and their process of articulating and determining their values. I'm with HGVenture. We are a management consulting firm that has been working with NDC for about 2 years. And so we're excited to be joining them for their week of lives. And this is the last one, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the last live.
Last live. So of course it's going to be the best one because it's the last one.
Pressure.
Yeah. So tell us who you are and what you do at NDC.
Go ahead.
I guess I'll start. Hi everyone, I am Angelica. I am the program coordinator for the Community Design Works program at the Neighborhood Design Center. I work specifically at the Prince George's County office, and I've been here for a little bit over a year now. Yeah, that's a little bit of me.
I'm Meryl Hambleton. I have held many roles at Neighborhood Design Center over the last 5 years, I think, and was a program manager working on creative placemaking projects, and most recently have been really focused on working with the values group and sort of bringing some of the writing work into that process. So.
Rock on. So tell me a little bit about the community design project. Like, what exactly is your role here?
Yeah, so the Community Design Works program is one of the programs where we offer pro bono design services. So we work on about 25, a little over sometimes, projects in Prince George's County with a wide range of partners. So anywhere from schools to community leaders to community gardens. It's a wide range of things. But yeah, I've been kind of taking the role of leading those types of projects for the past few months.
Rock on.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about this values process. Like, what was it born out of, and how did you all come to find us, HGVenture?
Sure. I can start, and John, feel free to interrupt me, or Tricia also. So I think the values process was rooted in the Neighborhood Design Center wanting to take a closer look at our diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of work framing at the organization. And this goes back, I think, to 2019 when we started looking for a group that could help facilitate that process for the organization. And I think that was when we first started talking with HGVenture. And then the process didn't actually start until 2020, right? And Tricia, I can let you maybe expound a little bit on kind of what that DEI work looked like and kind of how you all went about it. But the recommendations of your report really forefronted the values process at NDC. So we had a set of values that were on the website that were kind of, in the ether, and I think everyone at the organization, I mean, we're a nonprofit working on community-led design work, everyone was coming to the work with some conception of, I think, values-based process and work, but there wasn't necessarily a lot of coherence around what our shared values as an organization were. And the values, I think, didn't really go far enough. And that, I think, as was the case for a lot of nonprofits in 2020, became just egregiously apparent, both with the pandemic and with the, uprising around racial justice in the country. So I think we realized in both in our work and also in our attempts to sort of talk about our work during that time that there wasn't a clear sense of what we were rooted in, what our shared problem definition was, and kind of, being all on the same page about why we were doing the work we were doing and what made it important. So I think that's, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Angelica.
I think you did a good job.
I think you did a great job. And I really love hearing you articulate the why and how you got there, because in the work that Jackie and I and Anna and the folks at HGVenture do, we often are called on to come into an organization, dig up into it, right? Do all these listening sessions, talk to folks, and then we articulate what we heard, right? We're really just meant to be a mirror to the organization and say, hey, this is how people are feeling. This is where processes are broken. And then we put together these reports with these recommendations that sometimes end up sitting on a shelf. And we really felt and heard, right, that as a values-based organization, folks were all coming in to the work from a different place. And so we put values and articulating your values as our number one recommendation to you all. And so I have to give you all kudos for following us and trusting us down that path, because to be honest, it feels a little frou-frou, right? Like, y'all need to articulate your values. You know, I feel like some organizations are like, oh, we have values. They're on our website.
Yeah.
So that work feels like a waste of time. So talk to us a little bit about the process that HGVenture held to guide you all through articulating your values, and then sort of your process internally as a team. Like, how did you all approach articulating your values?
Yeah, I think we started off as a kind of a core working group, kind of summer last year, I want to say. And it was a mixture of staff, board members, and we kind of got together to come up with a plan of how we wanted to execute the values, kind of, producing process. And actually, I came in as a very new staff member, so it was kind of a very eye-opening experience, very out of my comfort zone type of work. But I say eye-opening because coming into an organization where there's, where we're working on kind of the framework of the organization and core structure that defines what everything we do means. I think it was a lot to take in, but we managed to create a plan and work with board members and staff members to try to involve everyone we needed to involve to get to where we are.
It sounds
today.
a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah. No, it was an overwhelming thing, but very kind of grateful for every step we took to make this happen. So we got the group together, and then we came up with strategic ways to involve staff that weren't a part of the working group, to share input wherever they could. And we had individual sessions, we had kind of smaller group sessions. It was a really in-depth process, but do you want to share a little bit more about
No, that was a great summary. I mean, I think one thing just to point out is that the staff group was mainly made up of all, it was volunteer sort of. It wasn't required of staff. It was staff who were interested in doing this work, which I think was kind of critical to the amount of effort that it ended up taking. I think, like, heading into the process, I'm not sure what the timeline was, but it was a few months or, and ultimately I think we spent a full year working on these.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I think we've talked a bit about this, like, why did it take so long? But it's like, it needed to be that long, because I think as we started having these conversations, like, it was like we had to work backwards once we were like, okay, well, what does it mean for us to value justice? What does justice mean in the context of our work? Justice can be defined a lot of different ways depending on where you're coming from. So kind of going back from, like, we did a process with the board where we took a long list of values words, right? And had people go through and say, like, these are the 8 most important, values words to me, and it was like justice, equity, curiosity, like, we had a long list, and it was sort of like, okay, well, how do we go from this long list of, like, one-off words to something that feels more substantive, And I think, again, it was like a lot of, like, what do these things mean to us as a group?
So making meaning of these words where, different people might have different understandings of those words themselves, and then also those words in relation to your work.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes.
So a lot of those words came from our own experiences with the organization and the work that we do. And if I could show you the list of words, it would be, we'll the session
We'll be here all day.
We'll be here all day. But it was mainly about what we think the organization fulfills and what our experiences have been during our time here.
Would you? Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say even if it's just a few months, which was my case.
Yeah.
At the time, yeah.
It feels like such a great opportunity for you to shape, the direction of the organization as someone who's fairly new. And so I also want to give NDC kudos for having this process be so inclusive of newer staff members, inclusive of the board. Because so often I think nonprofits are doing work internally with staff and the board isn't involved. And then it's taken to the board and the board is like, they haven't bought in, right? Because they weren't a part of the process. And so kudos to the board for being a part of a process like this. And then kudos to you all for having the foresight to say, let's make sure that the board is on board and let's have them be a part of this process, which I imagine is part of why it took so long.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a great point, which is that, our values as an organization, it's not just sort of the perspective of people who've been embedded with NDC for a long time and are fully in the work, but also how are we perceived by the board, by our community partners, having the board involved was critical because they had more of an outside perspective on how do these things read to someone who's maybe not immersed in the work day to day. So I think they brought critical perspective. I remember one conversation around, I think we were talking about environmental justice at this point, but one of the phrases involving the word justice, and our board member Maria brought her knowledge of having worked in environmental justice work and saying when you use this word, it brings all of these other connotations to it. So you need to be conscious of kind of what that word carries in the context of this specific type of work. And that was, I think for several of us, eye-opening. It made us reconsider, how do we want to bring this word into use in our values? Yeah,
that's powerful. I have two questions bubbling up in my mind, so y'all could take it however you want to. So one is, Angelica, I'd love it if you would be willing to read the values, at least a short form. And then I'm curious to hear from you both, what made you sign up to be a part of this process?
Okay, which one should we start with first?
Whichever you're...
I'll start with the second.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay,
what made us join?
Sure.
And then...
you can jump into
Yeah. Why did I volunteer to join the values kind of process? One, I wanted to step out of my comfort zone. I know that as a new and very young professional in the kind of industry, it's really hard to gain the courage to, step up and do these types of kind of initiatives that kind of define who an organization or a company or whatever is. And so I wanted to kind of, step out of the comfort zone and also get to know the shared meaning that different kind of members of the organization have for what it means to be a part of it and what it means to do the work that we do. Because I thought that was all important for me as a kind of being introduced into this type of work, and just a way of learning and building kind of my knowledge and skills in the work.
I have been, since my first work with NDC, involved in some of these kind of organizational definition projects. So one of my first projects was helping NDC rewrite their mission statement back in 2015, I think. And then another project I worked on was interviewing all the staff, also I think back 2015 or 2016, to put together this document called the Blueprint, which was summary and kind of like sort of toolkit based on our engagement methodology. So I think kind of codifying what the organization is and how it works, and then kind of this process of kind of what do we believe, like they all feel kind of a kind. And I don't know, just to me personally, this has been critically important work for Neighborhood Design Center. I mean, we're doing, you know, we have the ambition of making equitable, safe, healthy places for everyone. And I think it's like knowing kind of why our places are the way they are and what a future vision for them might be. Like, you really have to think seriously about what the current sort of situation is. And I think that's kind of the work that we were doing with the values, was like really delving into that and being like, let's identify this for ourselves. Let's say it, you know?
Yeah.
So I was really grateful to be able to be part of it.
They are lucky to have you. And your passion and willingness to do this stuff on the side, right? In addition to the great work you're doing, making equitable spaces for our communities. Let's hear them. We're all like, let's hear these values. So there's the long form version,
Yes.
and then there's the shorter sort of headlines.
Okay. So I'll read the shorter headlines, and then we can move on to kind of conversation. So the first one is committed to building just places. The second one is courageous in our curiosity. The third is inclusive in our collaboration. And the fourth is designing for just futures.
Let's hear inclusive, say it again, in our collaboration. I'd love to hear more about what that means and what that looks like.
Yeah.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, should we read?
You can read the whole value, yeah.
So, inclusive in our collaboration. We create participatory spaces anchored in support, connection, and mutual respect, where diverse experiences and types of expertise are valued. This approach recognizes everyone's innate agency, surfaces a range of perspective and opinions, and makes space for all who want to join in. We welcome the opportunity to work through differing perspectives and priorities and build deeper understanding. By fostering connections across traditional hierarchies, we support new relationships, the redistribution of power, and increase access to resources long after an individual project ends.
Whew, okay. You said a lot.
That's just one.
That's just one. That's just one. Whew, okay, so a lot of things pop out and resonate with me. I'm curious what pieces of this values statement really resonate with you.
There was one thing I didn't mention when you asked why we joined the values process, and I think I'm not sure why I didn't mention it, but I just thought of it as I was reading this. As a woman of color, as a young woman of color, you know, we don't get that many opportunities to join processes like these, or even have a say in kind of processes of kind of framing structural work in these types of environments, in the work environment and kind of the design field, anywhere.
Our government.
Yes. So I think it was important for us to kind of set the tone for kind of future collaborations, future kind of representatives of the Neighborhood Design Center and partnerships to kind of foster this inclusivity that we intend to maintain and strengthen currently and in the future.
I'm thinking like be the change you want to see, right? Like you gotta do it if this is what you hope to. You gotta model it if this is what you hope to do in the communities.
Yeah, I think what you said, I think this each of the 4 values were meant to kind of address a different area of the work. So like the first one was sort of establishing the context for our work, where we talk about kind of our problem definition. The second one talking a bit about our mindset. This one, inclusive in our collaboration, looking at our process. And then the last one kind of thinking about what is our vision, what is the future that we're working toward. So that was kind of like how we framed it. But I think, like, to your point, Tricia, about like the sort of embodying the value, right? Something we thought a lot about, and that was a really critical challenge, was like, how do we make these values resonate not only with like the work we want to do out in the world, but like how we operate as an organization. That was a huge challenge, because we were constantly thinking like, can we make this operate internally too? And I think, like, Angelica, what you just said is a great example of that. Like, your involvement in this process, like, is completely like you embodying the values of the organization, taking on the work of like looking at how we operate, looking at our approach, and like rethinking it, and like including yourself in it, and including your voice. And so I think I just wanted to call out that kind of internal external perspective that we'd written these 4 statements. We were like testing them, like, okay, does this make sense with our work out in the world, and does this make sense with how we operate as an organization? I think we got there.
Yeah. And I think this is where I have to shout out the HGV team. That's Jackie Pierce-Garrett and Anna Whitley-Scabriel, who worked with you all, because I think that's what HGV was able to bring to the process, right? Is support in modeling and helping you all design processes that kind of are in alignment with your co-design process.
Yeah.
And it took more time, but I think you're able to come up with a more rich and meaningful set of values that really speak to, like you said, your process, the context, and the future that you hope to see. Do we have time to dig into one more of the values, you think?
Yeah.
Okay. Which one should we do? So we got the committed to building just places, courageous in our curiosity, and designing for just futures.
I think maybe the last one.
The last one?
Would be a good one.
Do you want to read that one?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I have my rolled up copy, but we'll avoid that. Okay, so designing for just futures. Systemic inequity has both created current conditions of disinvestment and disproportionately accorded influence and resources to white-led nonprofits. We acknowledge the privilege our organization holds within the existing system. To push back on that system and support community power, we work where we are invited and on community-identified and community-led efforts. Further, we commit to decision-making structures that break down existing barriers, broadening our definitions of skill and expertise in community design, making space for new models of community development and ownership, and building an organization that centers those furthest from power. We believe in the radical potential of these actions. And I just want to point one thing out. I should let that sit for a second, but since we've been reading these and using the phrase we, like, this was another thing that we wanted to just clarify, so that the we wasn't ambiguous, but the we meaning the current staff and board of the Neighborhood Design Center. So that's the kind of perspective that these are coming from.
I'm so proud of you all. This is so powerful because you're so, I just see so much growth and progress and clarity.
Yeah.
From when you first started working with us back in 2020, where like everyone had just such a different entry point into the work and such a different perspective as to what is racial equity and what is justice, and how is our process in alignment with the organization that we actually want to be. And to see like these powerful words like systemic inequity, and we acknowledge the privilege our organization holds, and supporting community power. I mean, this is just so community-led efforts, community-identified. I mean, this is so well articulated. And so, yeah, kudos to you all for doing this work. I'm curious, how do we keep these fresh and alive, and like what's your vision for the future moving forward? Like what will the values look like 10 years from now, and how will you all hold each other accountable to staying in this type of a values driven and a clarity around the values based process of your work? Big question.
Yeah. I think short answer, we're just starting to get into that kind of work, starting to look into the lens of how do we operationalize.
Mm-hmm.
Am I saying it right?
Say it with no question. Operationalize.
Operationalize the values into the current processes of our work. So hiring processes, kind of who are we working with, and how do we share this new information. Being intentional with where we're putting these values out, and how we're doing it.
I think also like using the values to help guide that. Like it's this weird kind of meta process where we're like, how do we use the values to create the values? But I think like it's written into the text in certain ways, like under the courageous in our curiosity value, where we talk about bringing a critical lens to our own work. I think that's what it is. It's like, how do we constantly like look back at ourselves and say like, are we like, this gives us something to check our work against. You know what I mean? It's like we can, when we're selecting a new project, we can say like, does this like, I think actually one thing I just want to call out in the first value that's really critical is just this idea that unless we're actively working to mitigate immediate effects and dismantle long-standing power structures, we are complicit in upholding systemic oppression and white supremacy. That's a really critical one, because it's sort of like that, and that's like a bar that we've set for ourselves. I think a lot of these are future-looking. Like I don't necessarily think we've always achieved this in the past, and I think it's critical to have this articulated, because then we can say like, does this project achieve this standard that we've set for ourselves? Like, is our hiring process like achieving the standard? So I think it's a constant, cyclical, ongoing, flexible, living document.
Yes.
I think we're always going to be thinking and rethinking like how we use the values.
If only every nonprofit went through this process. I'm actually going to read the courageous in our curiosity before we wrap. We come to our work with open minds and a readiness to ask hard questions, listen deeply, and change course when necessary. Through this responsive approach, we make room for radical imagination, creativity, and inspired action in our collaborative practice. We strive to maintain a curious and critical lens on our own processes, programs, biases, and patterns, and to incorporate what we learn from our partners, peers, and environment. I love that mindset. And we share a similar mindset, so we're in alignment. We love working with values-driven clients who really are ready to roll up your sleeves and dig in and do the hard work. Anything we haven't touched on? We had like a whole agenda and a timeline and a plan, and we kind of just were in conversation. So anything else you want to share about the values process or your work in this process?
I think this is an ongoing work for us. I think it's not just going to stay here. I mean, we've worked so hard on it, and we hope that it stays valuable and kind of works for us for a really long time. But we also acknowledge that things change in our society, and things are always evolving. So we hope that we're able to kind of adapt these values to whatever scenario or current societal status we're in at the moment.
Which we've learned is always in flux, right? Pandemic.
I know. No, I think that's critical. Like that is the critical thing, and I think, like I the original framing of this conversation, I think, was like values for a legacy organization, which is like NDC's been around since 1968. The world has changed enormously in that period of 50 plus years. And so, yeah, it's like this balance of you don't want your values to change all the time, right? It's like we don't want to do this, like we don't want to say like we're redefining our values every year, but it felt like it was it was a critical moment to do like a really intensive process around values starting in 2020 for understandable reasons. I mean, there was a paradigm shift on multiple fronts that happened in that year around our understanding of racial justice and around public health, the intersection of those things in the built environment, like all this stuff like came together. But I think, like exactly as Angelica said, it's like we wanted to write values that could be responsive to changing circumstances. And so I think that's really what I hope these 4 values can do.
4 values, only 4, but 4 deep values.
We embedded like 50
yes,
different
I
ones.
know. I like how y'all
Like
did that.
hiding-
Yeah, they were like,
hiding
how can
all.
we keep these 500 words and
exactly.
put them all
The
in
whole
the
list.
format? Well, thank you all for joining us. One last shout out to Anna and Jackie with the HGV team for guiding this process. Shout out to the NBC leadership for sticking with this process and making the investment. Shout out to the board. And last but not least, the amazing volunteer group that stuck with this for many, many months and have really developed some strong values that will hopefully continue to guide your work.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.